The biggest mistake I see people make at the end of summer is waiting until the white powder has covered half the cucumber leaves before they do anything about it. By then, the plant may still look alive, but it is already losing the leaves that keep the cucumbers growing, and if you wait a little longer, you can watch a good harvest disappear week by week. I learned this the hard way many years ago when I walked into my garden one August morning and noticed a few pale white patches on the older cucumber leaves and thought I had plenty of time to deal with them later. I was wrong, and by the time I took it seriously, the vines were tired and the number of new cucumbers had dropped sharply. What surprised me was that the answer did not require an expensive bottle from the garden store or some complicated treatment that I had to measure with a dozen different ingredients. It was something simple that most of us already have in the kitchen: baking soda. And there is another version using ordinary milk or whey that I learned about from an older gardener who had been growing cucumbers long before I ever started paying attention to these things. Now, I want to be clear about something before we go any further. This is not a magic spray that turns a badly diseased plant green overnight. I do not believe in those kinds of promises, and after enough years in the garden, you learn that plants do not work that way. What this simple treatment can do is make the leaf surface less favorable for powdery mildew and help slow the problem when you catch it early, especially when you combine the spray with a few basic habits that cost almost nothing. The first thing I want you to learn is how to recognize the problem before it gets ahead of you, because most gardeners notice it when the damage is already obvious. Look closely at the older leaves, especially the leaves inside a crowded part of the vine. You may see tiny pale spots that look almost like flour was brushed across the surface. At first, it can seem harmless because the plant is still flowering, and you may still be picking cucumbers every morning. But those little patches can spread, and the leaves can gradually lose their ability to do the work that keeps the plant productive. There is one small mistake I used to make at this exact stage, and fixing it changed the way I treated mildew for good, because the spray was only half of the answer. The other half was something I was doing every single morning without realizing I was helping the problem spread. The reason this problem gets worse so quickly at the end of summer is that many of us see the white coating and immediately think the plant simply needs more water or more fertilizer. So we water it heavily, feed it, and hope the leaves will recover, but that is usually not the right response. When a cucumber vine is already under pressure, giving it more of everything can create more trouble instead of solving the problem. I have seen gardeners pour fertilizer around a tired cucumber plant because they thought the yellowing leaves meant the plant was hungry, only to find that a few days later the white patches had spread even farther. The better approach is much simpler. First, look at the plant and remove the worst leaves if they are badly covered or already dying. I do not mean stripping the whole vine bare. I mean taking away leaves that are clearly finished so the remaining healthy leaves have room and air around them. This is one of those old garden habits that looks almost too simple to matter, but it makes a difference because a crowded cucumber vine stays damp inside even when the weather outside feels dry. I also try not to splash water over the leaves when I water. If the soil needs water, I put it down near the base and let the roots take care of the rest. Most gardeners are in such a hurry to help the plant that they forget the leaves do not need to be wet all day. And here is where the end of summer becomes especially important. The days may still be warm, but the nights are often cooler and the morning air can stay damp longer than you realize. You walk past the garden, and everything looks fine from a distance, but inside the cucumber leaves there may be a completely different story. I remember one season when I kept thinking the mildew was under control because I sprayed whenever I saw a white spot. What I did not understand was that I was treating the visible problem without paying attention to the conditions that allowed it to return. Once I started checking the leaves more carefully and removing the worst ones before spraying, the whole routine became easier. I was no longer chasing the disease from one leaf to another. I was slowing it down before it had the chance to take over. And that is when I started using the simple kitchen solution I want to show you, because the ingredient itself is not the clever part. The clever part is how you use it and when you use it, And there is one small detail in the mixture that most people never think about. There is an old habit I picked up from another gardener that changed the way I look at powdery mildew, and it has nothing to do with buying another product. He told me that when you see the first white patch, you should not panic, and you should not wait for the whole leaf to turn white. You should act while the problem is still small, because that is when a simple treatment has the best chance of helping. That advice stayed with me, because it is exactly how I now handle my cucumber vines in late summer. I remember one August when I had a row of cucumbers that looked tired, but were still producing every morning. A few leaves had those pale white marks, and I almost ignored them because there were plenty of cucumbers hanging underneath. Then I remembered what I'd been told and decided to deal with it that same evening. I removed the leaves that were badly affected, opened up the crowded parts of the vine, and prepared a simple homemade spray. The first version I used was baking soda mixed with water and a small amount of mild liquid soap. The idea is very simple. The baking soda changes the conditions on the leaf surface and makes it less comfortable for powdery mildew, while the small amount of soap helps the mixture spread over the leaf instead of simply running off. I was not trying to cure every damaged leaf, because a leaf that is already badly covered is not going to become new again. I was trying to protect the healthy leaves that were still doing the work of keeping the plant productive. That distinction is important, and most people miss it. They spray a sick leaf and expect it to look young and green again the next morning. I learned to judge success differently. If the white patches stop spreading quickly and the healthy leaves stay clean for longer, I know I am moving in the right direction. There's also another old method that I like when I have milk in the refrigerator. Many longtime gardeners use a mixture of 1 part milk to 2 parts water and spray it over the leaves. It sounds almost too ordinary to be useful, but milk sprays have been used by gardeners for years to help suppress powdery mildew. I like having both options because some weeks I use the baking soda mixture and another time I use the milk solution. The important thing is not to treat either one like a miracle cure. I always test a small area of the plant first and watch it before treating the whole vine, especially when the weather is hot. That little test has saved me more than once because even a simple household mixture can be too strong for some plants under certain conditions. And now we are getting to the part that makes the difference between a spray that seems useless and one that actually gives you a fair chance of keeping the cucumber vine productive. Now, let me show you how I actually make the baking soda spray, because this is where I would slow down and pay attention. You do not need much, and that is exactly why I like this method. For a simple home mixture, I use about 1 tablespoon of baking soda in 1 gallon of water, and I add a small amount of mild liquid soap to help the spray cover the leaves evenly. I mix it gently until the baking soda is well dispersed, and then I put it into a clean hand sprayer. I do not make the mixture stronger because more is not always better, and a strong solution can leave you with leaf damage instead of helping the plant. That is one of those mistakes people make when they think a bigger dose must mean a better result. It does not. Before I spray the whole cucumber vine, I always test a few leaves first and wait to see how the plant responds. This takes only a little time, and it can save you from treating an entire plant with a mixture that happens to be too strong for the conditions in your garden. Once I know the plant is handling it well, I spray the leaves thoroughly, especially the surfaces where I can already see the first white patches. I want a light, even coating, rather than leaves dripping with solution. I also pay attention to the leaves inside the plant, because that is where people often miss the beginning of the problem. You do not need to soak every inch of the garden. You are trying to cover the cucumber foliage that you want to protect. And here is a small detail that I learned to respect after making the mistake myself. I do not spray in the middle of a hot, sunny afternoon. I choose a cooler part of the day and avoid treating leaves when the sun is beating directly on them. Early morning or later in the day is much easier on the plant, provided the foliage will have enough time to dry. I also avoid spraying when heavy rain is about to arrive because I do not want the mixture washed away immediately. The goal is to give the solution a chance to stay on the leaves and do its job. If the weather stays suitable, I inspect the plants again after several days and look closely at the newest leaves. That is where I want to see clean growth appearing without the white patches spreading rapidly. But there is another version of this old home treatment that can be especially useful when you already have milk or whey in the refrigerator, and the way I use it is a little different from the baking soda mixture. The milk or whey method is one I still like because it is simple enough that you can prepare it without making a trip anywhere, and I learned it from gardeners who were used to using what they already had around the house instead of buying something for every little problem. If I have fresh milk available, I mix 1 part milk with 2 parts water and use it as a light spray over the cucumber leaves. If I have whey left from making cheese or another kitchen job, I can use that in a similar way, diluted with water so it is not too strong. I always test a small section first because every garden is a little different, and a plant under heat stress can react differently from one growing in mild weather. Then, I look at the leaves the next day before I treat the whole vine. There is something else I pay attention to that many people overlook. I do not keep spraying the same tired leaves simply because they have already been damaged. If a leaf is heavily covered in mildew, turning yellow, and no longer contributing much to the plant, I remove it and focus my attention on the healthier growth. This keeps the vine more open and makes it easier to see whether the problem is actually slowing down. I used to think that leaving every leaf on the plant was always better because more leaves must mean more food for the cucumbers. But once a leaf is badly damaged, it may be doing very little and can simply make the plant harder to manage. The goal, at the end of summer, is not to create a perfect-looking cucumber plant. The goal is to keep enough healthy foliage working long enough to finish the harvest. That change in thinking made gardening much less frustrating for me. I also try to inspect the vines every few days rather than waiting until something looks terrible. You do not need to spend half an hour doing it. Walk past the plants, turn over a few leaves, look at the newest growth, and check whether the white patches are spreading. That little habit gives you an advantage because early action is always easier than trying to rescue a plant that has already lost most of its leaves. And there is one mistake I especially want you to avoid with these homemade sprays. Do not assume that because baking soda, milk, or whey are ordinary household ingredients you can spray them every day without thinking. Too much treatment can stress the foliage, and stressed leaves are not what we want at this stage of the season. Give the plant time, watch its response, and repeat only when it makes sense for the conditions you are seeing. The next step is where the real payoff comes in, because protecting the leaves is only part of keeping those late summer cucumbers coming. What I want you to remember now is that the spray is not the whole job, and it never has been for me. The real difference comes from keeping the cucumber plant comfortable enough that it can continue producing while you slow down the mildew. Once I started looking at the whole plant instead of just the white spots, I noticed things that I had been ignoring for years. A vine packed tightly against itself was harder to inspect and harder to keep dry. A vine growing through old yellow leaves was harder to manage. A plant that was struggling for water during a hot afternoon was already under stress before I even thought about mildew. So, after treating the leaves, I take a few minutes to clean up the plant gently. I remove leaves that are completely yellow or badly damaged, but I leave the healthy green leaves because those are still feeding the plant and helping it finish the season. I also guide the vines so they are not lying in a tangled pile on the ground if I can avoid it. Better spacing between the leaves gives me a much easier view of what is happening and makes the plant feel less crowded. This is one of those old habits that costs nothing but can save you a lot of frustration. Then I look at the soil. I want it evenly moist, not soaked and not bone dry. I water the ground near the roots rather than spraying the whole plant from above. If we get a stretch of hot weather followed by cool, damp nights, I pay even closer attention because those changes can make the plant struggle. I'm not trying to force another month of growth from a dying vine. I'm simply trying to give a healthy cucumber plant the conditions it needs to keep producing for as long as the weather allows. After several days, I look for the most important sign of progress. I am not expecting the old white marks to disappear completely. I am looking at the newer leaves. If the new growth stays cleaner and the white patches are no longer racing across the vine, that tells me the routine is helping. If the mildew continues spreading quickly despite everything I am doing, I do not keep adding stronger and stronger homemade mixtures. Sometimes the plant has simply reached the end of its productive life, and removing it is the sensible choice. But when you catch the problem early, a little cleanup, careful watering, and a simple baking soda or milk-based spray can sometimes buy you valuable extra weeks of harvest. And those extra weeks are exactly where the little effort begins to pay you back, because the next thing you notice is not the mildew at all. It is the cucumbers still hanging there when you thought the season was already finished. When I look back at the cucumber seasons where I managed to keep the vines producing late into summer, it was never because I found some expensive product or discovered a perfect formula that worked every time. It was because I stopped waiting for the problem to become serious. I started looking at the leaves regularly, removing the ones that were already badly damaged, keeping water near the roots, giving the vine enough room for air to move through it, and using a simple homemade treatment when the first signs appeared. That is the part I want you to remember, because it gives you something much more useful than a single recipe. It gives you a routine that you can repeat every season. If you see a few small white patches, you can prepare the baking soda mixture with about 1 tablespoon of baking soda in a gallon of water and a small amount of mild liquid soap. Test it on a few leaves, and if the plant responds well, treat the healthy foliage with a light, even coating. Or, if you prefer the old milk method, 1 part milk mixed with 2 parts water gives you another simple option that many gardeners have used for years. You can use whey in a similar diluted way when that is what you have available. Neither method should be treated as a miracle cure, and neither will bring a badly damaged leaf back to life. But they can be useful tools when the problem is caught early and the plant is otherwise healthy. I also want you to remember that you do not need to spend a lot of money to care for a cucumber vine at the end of the season. Sometimes the best things in the garden are already sitting in the kitchen, and sometimes the forgotten part of gardening is simply paying attention before a small problem becomes a large one. If your cucumber leaves stay mostly green and the new growth remains healthy, you may be able to keep picking cucumbers for weeks longer than you expected. You walk outside in the morning. Look under the leaves, and there is another cucumber ready for the kitchen. That is the reward. Not a perfect garden, but a garden that keeps giving because you learn to notice what it needs. And next time you see those first pale white spots, do not wait until the whole vine is covered. Catch them early, keep the plant open and healthy, use your simple treatment carefully, and keep watching. Because there is another old garden problem that often appears when summer starts fading, and the solution may be sitting in your kitchen too.